Hey guys, in this gardening video I'm going to showcase for you how and why I like to start germinating seeds the way that I do. Stay tuned. So for seed starting mix, it's pretty simple. Like I make my own mix here, really you can buy your own. This is basically 50-50 of peat moss and coconut coir. The coconut coir typically comes in little bricks and then you just put them in a bin and you fill them with water and then they expand like to 8, 9, 10 times their size. And while this doesn't really have pretty much anything in terms of nutrients, it doesn't really matter because I'm just going to be using this to get the seeds started and they're going to be growing based on the nutrients in the seed itself. In addition, whenever I want to water, I can also use water-based nutrients if I need it at that point. Now before, I basically was just using little cups like this that I got at the dollar store. They're plastic cups, and I just drilled a little hole in the bottom. That way it can allow for drainage, as well as wicking. And also on each cup, you want to make sure that you put a label or develop some kind of labeling system so that you know what you have growing, because believe me, you'll get doing more and more things, and if you think that you can make a mental note of all this stuff, you won't, trust me. This year I also found these little pots at a dollar store, and they're a little better because they have 3 holes in the bottom, so they allow for even more drainage and wicking, and they're a little bigger too. Now I've already topped up all these little cups with the potting mix, and what I'm going to do is just this last one here. What I want to do is make sure that I get the cup completely full and quite compact. I can use my finger to press this in. This will make for a very nice sturdy root system when the plant grows into it. Now some potting mixes also come with perlite, which is those little white granule looking things, and they can be a bit bulky in size, and I don't like having that in my potting mix because I find that it takes away from the even surface area for putting seeds. I also don't find it necessary for its purpose. One additional thing that you can add though is vermiculite, because all these things are going to help with very good water retention so that you don't have to water the seedlings nearly as often. So there we go. Let's clean that off. And my last cup is ready to go. Now it doesn't matter what kind of tray you want to use. I like these solid plastic trays. I actually got these also at a dollar store. In addition, I can also use another one of these to cover the top initially, just for that short period of darkness that the seeds want in order to get started. After that, it's just a matter of taking this off and allowing good light exposure. So you can see here I actually have another tray, and what I did was I drilled a couple of holes on the bottom of one, and the point of this is going to be that when I water this, I can just do it from the top, and then I'd lift the tray up so that I can drain the water underneath, and I can actually even recycle that water and use it over and over again to make it really practical. Now the next step obviously is setting the seeds in our little growing cups. So you're going to need some kind of little probing tool, and then you'll just use it to probe little holes into the soil mix. You don't have to go too deep, like half an inch at most is really all you need. And you're going to do this for as many seeds as you're going to put in here. I'm using these older bell pepper seeds that have a somewhat low germination rate, so I'm actually going to dig 6 holes in here. But normally if you had good seeds, you probably 3 is the most you'd need, because then all you're going to do is thin it out later once they grow. So I got 6 of my pepper seeds here. And then just going to carefully drop them into the holes that I made. So you can kind of see how they're just sitting over top there. And then with the same poking tool, I can just wedge the seeds in about a 1/4 inch down into the hole. After that, it's just a matter of smoothing it out, making sure they're covered, and then I make sure that I write on my label, California Wonder Pepper. And you might even want to put down the date that you started it, because if you add a lot of seeds going, it'll give you a good information about which seeds have high germination, which don't, and it might be information you want to consider later for perhaps next year's plantings. So I'm going to do this for all my seeds, and then I'll move on to the next step. So now that I've got a bunch of my varieties of bell peppers and eggplants in here, the next thing we got to do is water these. What works really well is one of these pump sprayers, so that you don't have to keep squirting all the time. And it's definitely better to use something like this than something to pour directly on, because that would just splash everything out and you'd probably get your seed out of place. So with this guy, a few pumps, then I just gently spray it down. I'm being fairly generous because I want to make sure that the seed gets completely soaked and that the water retains moisture for quite a while. So this is the setup, and we'll take a look again after we have some progress to update on. Here we are again, guys, in my bundle of joy of seedlings, and everything's just sprouting so well in like a 5-6 day time frame. So as you can see, because I put so many seeds per cup, then there's a lot of things that are actually coming out. So I have to wean out the herd a bit and take out the weakest plants. Now, one cool tip that you could do, if you wanted to pull out very gently one of these guys while they're still young, you can then wedge a hole in another place and put that in there, and you can pretty much use the same sprout without having to just throw them out if you're weeding them out. But I feel satisfied with the quantity of what I have and the rate at which things are germinating, so I'm just going to go ahead and thin out individual seedlings, such as this guy here, because he's the weakest of the three. And depending on what it is, I may want to leave 1 or 2 seedlings. So basically, you just go ahead and you do that for all your seedlings, and eventually, soon enough, the roots are going to be hitting here low enough that you can transplant this to a bigger pot that'll sustain this for about a 4 to 6 week period. So this here is a demonstration of how I water my pots with all the seedlings in them. Because the tray has the holes in them, all I did was put them into another tray that I keep on my table here that has water in it, and this way when I put the tray in here, basically the water will balance itself out by seeping into this guy, and through the holes in each cup the wicking action will naturally absorb into the soil. Because you can see it's gotten kind of dry as I had these sitting underneath the grow lights. So when I see this happen, I know it's time to give them a watering, and I'm going to leave this sitting here probably for 20 minutes or so. That should be enough time for the wicking action to completely soak into the soil to restore the moisture levels. And you can see they're growing pretty nice. Eventually I'm going to be thinning these out, so I just keep the 1 or 2 strongest, and then eventually I'll be moving these into larger pots as well before they go outside. So after that 20-minute mark or so, I'll basically pull that out, let it drain, and then put it back into the container without the holes, and that will grow back into the growing station here underneath the grow lights. Now I want to point out here why I like using individual cups like this instead of growing trays like this, which come in varying sizes, but they're all fixed. You can't isolate individual plants, you'd have to actually move them out of the block. You can see that there's various growth rates, as some plants haven't even sprouted and others already have, and they'll grow at different rates. If I have these all stuck in containers like this, it's more troublesome and more tedious and more work to isolate the ones that I want to separate and move out earlier, because they're progressing a lot faster than the ones that you can see haven't even germinated yet. So individual cups give you a flexibility that you just don't get by using full-grown trays that can be as large as like 72 or more plugs per flat. So these here are my bell peppers, and I decided that I wanted to have a few extra of these plants, so I'm not thinning out every single one of them down to the single bell pepper. So what I'm going to do is try pulling out a couple of them. Like you can see here, the middle guy is a little shorter, so I'm going to try taking him out. This one has a cluster of 3 and then 1 that's just about to sprout out. So we have to be careful when we're doing this so that we're not interfering with the root developing of the other plants that are going to stay in the pot. So if you have too many, you might be better off just cutting them out or plucking away the one that's like furthest from the one that you're going to keep in the pot. Using a wooden skewer or something pointy like this, we're going to pre-dig a little hole here. We want to make sure that's deep enough and wide enough so that we can get the root of the seedling to comfortably fit in there, and then we can just make it snug afterwards by moving the soil closer to the center. So this won't always work, sometimes they might just break, but it's worth a shot if you want more plants without having to start more seed. One way to do this is by grabbing the leaves and then wiggling back and forth while slightly pushing up. Okay, I did get a little bit of something break, but I did also get a little bit of clean root, So I'm going to put that in. And then when pressing the soil back, we want to keep the soil level the same height as where the plant was in the previous pot. The reason I wouldn't grab it by the stem when pulling it out is because if I do that, I run the risk of breaking the stem and then the whole plant a goner. But grabbing from the leaves, they're surprisingly strong and they can take that little bit of pull. So having worked the soil area that was loosened around the stem here, it's pretty snug, it's pretty secure. The best thing you can hope for now is that it will reestablish itself, because this is a bit of a shock for the plant. And back in the original container, I'm just going to cover a little bit up that hole that was next to the other plant. And there we go. Now we have another plant, and all I have to do is just give this a little bit of a watering, fill in the label of what it is, and I can use the original date that I sowed the seed, because it would make sense to write today's date since it's been growing for a lot longer than that. And then just putting this in the same container where I have my other seedlings going. Another way to go about this to get the little seedling out without breaking the root and the stem is to use the wedging tool to kind of poke around the stem so that you loosen the soil up to within the first 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch or so. And then that will release a lot of the pressure around the stem so that you can pull it out the same way I showed before, and then you'll vastly decrease the chance of doing some significant damage at the root level. And as before, I'm going to grab the leaves and just at the top of the stem, wiggle, and there we go. There was no snap this time. The root just came out pretty cleanly. You can see it's actually a pretty long taproot already. And then the tricky part is getting it inside the hole. If it doesn't go in evenly, then we're going to have to just wedge the hole a lot wider. Just like in life, there's never any guarantees. But I'm pretty confident that this guy will make it. And I can poke on the outskirts inwardly just to tighten up the little bit of that space, that gap that we created when making the original hole. And as before, I'm going to leave this wicking up a little bit of water so that the soil stays moist, and hopefully he'll be alright. So here we are. It's been 2 weeks, and the peppers and the tomatoes are coming up really nicely, looking really healthy. But the starter mix doesn't really have anything to feed the plants on any long-term basis. They're also pretty small. It was just to get the seeds started. So if you're taking this approach for starting seeds, then we need to move them into bigger containers. Now the telltale signs for me that it's time for an upgrade is back there especially. That's a broccoli. And the initial leaves eventually tend to die away anyways. The fact that's already happening and we've got true leaves already growing out of them, as is the case with all the tomatoes, means that they're going to be drawing on nutrients beyond what the seed is capable of delivering, and it's taking whatever it can out of the soil. So this is really one of the prime reasons why I like having these in individual cups instead of complete flats, is because I can move these things easily around and take them out without disturbing anything else. So I'm going to take the plants that are largest and ready for transplant and put them into larger pots. But before I do that, I'm going to show you another step. I thought I'd just briefly talk about something called air pruning. Now there are pots on the market that will already come perforated with holes on the sides, not just the bottom. The idea of this is pretty much simple, like it's with the use of fabric pots. When the roots of a plant penetrate to the barrier, the edge of the pot, they tend to just circle around, and this creates really entangled root growth and diminishes the capacity of the plant to grow. So air pruning is when the plant naturally recognizes that its roots are reaching contact with air. It in a way cauterizes off its own root ends, and then the plant signals itself to expand its overall root growth instead of just the main roots that were initially coming up. That creates a really solid foundation for a root that will really become a lot more efficient for uptaking nutrients from the soil that it's in. So as you can see here, these are just basic pots, and I got these really cheaply at a dollar store. They're a number 5 plastic, so it's probably going to be some of the best I will be able to find. And because they're so inexpensive, they make a good buy, and I can buy a lot of these for a small amount. And it's a really good size. This is 3.5 inches, and this is going to allow me to have my tomatoes and peppers to be able to stay in here long enough in a way that it won't hurt them before I can get them outside, because the weather here in Ontario is just really cold, even in April. So I really do need to keep these plants indoors for quite an extended period of time. But if we do the air pruning method, this is going to support them to last in here a lot longer, utilize the most efficiently the nutrients that are going to be in the potting mix, and not keep the roots bound in that coiling method that limits the overall growth of the plant. Now to do this, we use something called hot knife. You can pick one of these up at a local arts or crafts store, and you just got to be careful with it. But once you plug it in, this rod heats up, and then there's different accessories that you can put in the end there when you screw them in. And I'm just using the pointer tool that allows me to basically just puncture holes in plastic or other materials, but this works really efficiently in plastic. And if you can do this outside, that would definitely be better, because you are going to give off fumes and you don't want to really breathe them in. It's really cold and windy outside, so I'm doing this indoors, but I do have a window open and some essential oils going as well, just to help with cleansing the air. So it's pretty simple. I basically chose a pattern, and then I'll insert, and I'll do this very quickly because it takes no time at all to make that mark. And ideally, I want to keep these holes relatively small so that I don't have soil falling out of them after I fill it, and they'll still be just enough to provide that signaling effect to the roots of the plants, saying, hey, stop growing when you reach me. You can see those fumes. So I'm going to do this all the way around each side, and it doesn't take that long to do, well, unless you're doing a lot of pots like I am, then it might take a little longer. But this is a very inexpensive way to do this, rather than spending extra money on more expensive pots that already come with this kind of perforation. And this is dirt cheap. I literally got this for 10 bucks. So there you go. This is a really, I think, vital step when you're keeping plants indoors for a prolonged period of time. In pots, you want to do this. I'm using these cafeteria trays, and this is where all my finished pots and plants are going to be going, because this is going to be a really easy way to water the plants from the root system upwards. This is going to be really good because when we have plants that are growing under grow lights, it's almost unavoidable that algae is going to begin to grow, and I don't want to create that imbalance of microorganisms on the soil. It can have detrimental effects on the plant. I've seen that happen, and this is just a good way to avoid it by having watering occur from underneath. So once the plants are in here, then I just pour some water into here, adjust it with any kind of pH or nutrients that I might want, and then I'll just let it soak it up. And I won't even have to worry about draining out excess, because I can control how much it goes in here and then how much it wicks up. So here we are. This is week 5, and it's a pretty important day because I'm going to be transplanting these seedlings into bigger containers. These are the perforated ones that I worked on. Now, I want to stress that the plants were looking really healthy up until just a little while ago, because honestly, these containers are just a little too small for plants to be in for 5 weeks. But I got really busy, so I want you to note that the reflection of what we see here isn't or should not be what will be typically found, because you're gonna really only want to keep the tomatoes in here or other veggies like this in small containers, probably for at most 3 weeks. So I'm quite a bit over the bar, and I'm stressing out the plants a bit, but I'm sure they'll make a good recovery. So I'm going to start by demonstrating here with one and how I'm going to prepare these. So to get them out of these small pots, I'm just going to turn upside down. By now they should be fully root bound, so they should come out reasonably easily. There we go. You can see how they're coiling at the bottom there, so that's root boundness, but otherwise really healthy roots. So this simple potting mix worked pretty good. Now the next step is to cut off the unnecessary leaves on tomatoes specifically, because they're going to bury these deeper than the current line at. So I'm going to take off the original 2 leaves that formed, and the next 2 leaves on top of that. So just snipping this one. And I know this is looking pretty bare, but the thing with tomato plants, as you probably already know, when you plant these, they're going to grow roots along the entire stem line where all these hairs are coming out of. So that's just going to mean a much stronger plant in the long run because of all the extra root mass. So I'm going to put that in the pot, and you're going to see that it's really going to be bare right up to here. And when I transplant these outside into the garden, I'm going to put them even deeper still, and then they'll develop even stronger roots at that point. Now, one other little technique I like to use with the pots is so that soil just doesn't fall out everywhere underneath, is I just kind of pre-cut a bunch of these little paper towel squares, and then I just place them on the bottom. That way the holes are covered up, and now I can put a little bit of soil in here without having basically a mess going everywhere. So I got some soil in the bottom there. Not a lot, because I want this tomato to go really deep. And I'm going to give it just a little bit of wedging here on the bottom to just loosen up the roots a little bit, which I wouldn't need to have done if these were not root bound, but we work with what we've got. Now I've got my potting mix down here in my container, and I'm just going to use a spoon to scoop the soil mix into the pot. So here we are, I've got 2 of the tomatoes potted up, and the next thing is to remove the label that I had on the little red container and putting it on this bigger container now so that I know what's what. So beefsteak tomato. And I got about 50 more of these to do. So now I moved on to the bell peppers, and I just wanted to show one thing about this. Unlike the tomatoes, I'm not burying these excessively deep. Rather, it's going to be relatively close to the top soil level. But I am going to cover a little bit of the lower stem, just a few millimeters, because if you look really close, you can kind of see how there's little roots trying to grow from about the first centimeter of the stem here. So if I cover just that little bit of soil, I know that roots will additionally grow from there. But more than that would then cause danger to the stem, potential for rot. So we really only want to go just a few millimeters above the line here for peppers. As I'm gradually filling up the pot here with soil, I'm also just using this little plastic press here just to tampen it down a little bit. Not a lot by any means, but it's just to make sure that there isn't a whole lot of gaps in the soil. And by the time I'm done, there's still a lot of give when I press down with my thumb, so I know that's just perfect. Now I've positioned all of my pots on a tray. Basically, I'm just going to pour some filtered pH adjusted water to the base here, but I mean you can use whatever water you want really. And I'm just pouring in enough water that it will cover the tray about halfway. It's not even an inch high, the tray. And this way the plants will absorb the water from underneath, or rather the soil will absorb the water through the wicking action. And I won't even need to worry about removing the excess water because it's not that much that I'm putting in, and if I need to I can put in more. And what remains will just evaporate. So this is going to give it a really good initial soaking. And then I probably won't need to water this for a while, but we'll see, because the grow room does get warm, especially in the afternoon, and with the lights on top, that does create a bit of additional heat. I have the lights positioned about 5 inches above the plants, and I think this should be alright. Now there's some more work to do on the pepper plants, but we won't do that just yet because I want them to settle from this shock before we give them more shock. So we'll be back for that. Okay guys, here we are revisiting the pepper plants, and 2 very important things that I want to go over here. Now, they're in their new pots. They've been here for just a few days, so they look very well adapted, and what I want to do is, one term for it anyway is called deadheading, or just cutting the tops off, so that I can get these to branch into 2 segments, and then grow into a bushier plant that will, in the end, yield me more fruit. The other thing is, it's in this little pod, not in the ground yet, and it's already beginning to bear fruit. We don't want that when it's in such a small pod, because it's just going to be too much stress early on in such a contained environment. So I'm going to take that off in conjunction with leveling it to the height that I want it. So most people tend to go 4 to 6 leaves up. So looking at the nodes, this would be the first 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6. And I was thinking of leaving the 7th, because I do feel bad cutting these plants. It's always a hard thing. But no, I'm going to do the right thing and go no higher than 6, because this way, if I go too high, it'll still stay flimsy. But if I go lower, it's going to develop a really nice thick stem. I'm going to cut it just above the node at a roughly 45-degree angle with clean shears. And from here, it will develop a nice healed over scar. That's it, she's off. Well, what we left behind is that, and I'm going to repeat this process for all the other pepper plants, and next time we'll be seeing these going out into the garden.